Welcome to The Perspective with Mike Sherbino and his guest co-host, Julie Stautland. Today on the program, we take a look at hidden agendas. Are transparency and trustworthiness out of style values in today's society? Among some of our leaders and influencers, we certainly see our fair share of hidden agendas among many world leaders, entertainers, and other public and private figures vying for power and their own self-interests. What does God say about things hidden? Coach Drew is in the house. Mike and Julie interview Dr. Andrew Blackwood, who tells us about the harm hidden agendas have from the highest places in the land to the corner office onto the public square.
Well, welcome to The Perspective. I'm Mike Sherbino. Glad you're with us today, and a special welcome again to my guest co-host, Julie Stautland. You're not really a guest any longer.
No, not anymore.
No, you're becoming a fixture, so that's all good. We're talking today about hidden agendas, Julie,
Yes.
and I don't know what your agenda is. Sometimes I'm not sure what my own is. But have you ever been dealing with somebody and you just felt, hey, they weren't the real thing. They just weren't genuine. And sometimes, Julie, what I've said to my wife, Terry, is that, hey, I wonder what is their angle? Where are they going at?
Oh boy.
And then, sometimes it can be that day, or it can be a week later or a year later. Sometimes the truth comes out. I don't know how you feel, but I know how I feel.
Sometimes the truth comes out. Sometimes we never know, right? Sometimes we're wondering. It's hard to discern.
We struggle with the hidden agenda. And today we're going to talk about that. We have a special guest coming on the program.
Yes,
it's Coach Drew. I love Andrew Blackwood. He has some great insights. He's the author of the book, The Art of a Genuine Apology.
That sounds awesome.
It sounds like there's a hidden agenda in there if we're looking for a genuine apology. But we're going to be looking at that today. We're going to talk about how hidden agendas can impact your relationships. And sometimes, even you might have a hidden agenda and you're using it to manipulate, to control people. Julie, confess now, have you ever tried to manipulate or control your husband, Tor?
Well, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I'm sure I'm guilty.
Okay, well, we're not going to go there. We're just going to leave the jury to decide today, and you're the jury. We're glad you're watching The Perspective. Our hope is that you're going to find hope and meaning and direction for this journey called life. Stay with us. We're going to be right back.
Welcome back. Okay, Coach Drew, let's jump right into this. In your estimation, what would you say fuels hidden agendas in people's minds?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are a couple things, and depending on the context, it can vary. But what I find is there is, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and soundness of mind.
I love that scripture.
And so do I. And I think it's so relevant because when we are afraid, then we tend to hide, right?
Yes.
We can be afraid that we are not going to be accepted. We can be afraid that there is not going to be enough of whatever it is, whether it's time, money, love. So that gets in the way ultimately of us choosing to be vulnerable, to choosing to be naked and unashamed. So we hide the truth. And that often leads to us having hidden agendas.
Wow, I like that. We often talk about how some people have hidden agendas, but what does that mean exactly?
Well, for me, depending on which role I'm in, right? Hidden agendas has a really negative connotation, as if someone is intentionally trying to deceive me. But often that's not the case. So sometimes there can be multiple goals in a given instance, right? And people miss each other. So you might be wanting one thing, I might be wanting another thing.
Right.
And that makes it difficult to really listen to each other and to really hear what someone wants. For example, in the morning, I have a number of objectives. I want to get my children fed. I want to get to school on time. I want to promote responsibility and independence in them.
Right, and that's all good. Yeah.
Right. And I have competing agendas. I have competing goals. So sometimes we can get confused with what we actually really want. So we can be trying to get at both of these things at the same time. So we're not really honest because we're not really prioritizing what's most important. And it can be really confusing.
Wow, yeah. How do you see it in people you deal with as a counselor on a day-to-day basis?
Well, again, so when I meet with people, typically they don't try to come and deceive me, right? They typically come because they want help with something. And I listen well. Okay. So I know that sometimes there can be many levels of goals, things that people want. And a lot of the times people are not aware of what is the real concern, what is the real goal, what it is that they actually really want. So a lot of the times people are not aware. So listening for what it is that they really want and what it is that they are missing in their life, that's a really big key to helping them become clear about what it is for themselves. Because only when you are aware and honest with yourself can you be aware, or can you be honest and clear with other people.
I think that's so true. It's like we have to come to the point where we are aware. If we can't see our own blind spots, how are we ever going to identify that there's a problem to deal with properly, right?
Right.
Yeah. In your book, The Art of a Genuine Apology, you explain how what we observe can influence our beliefs, which can then dictate our behaviors. Can this statement also speak to how we may develop our own hidden agendas as we grow up?
Certainly. So if you come from an environment where there is a lack of opportunity for you to be heard, or for you to make goals for yourself and to determine certain things, you can come to some conclusions that this is just the way the world is. So in order to get what you actually want, you have to use subversive or hidden means. So then we live from that perspective, we live from that place. So, that idea of, God not giving us a spirit of fear, but love, power, and soundness of mind. If you come from an environment where you feel powerless a lot of the times, then you seek to gain that power in a different way, right? You seek to gain that control, that ability to self-determine your life, your decisions, how things happen, but you don't do it clearly, honestly, and directly.
Right. I think you've answered a lot of this, because I was going to ask, like, what fears are people hiding behind in not wanting to just voice their agenda? Maybe you can add something extra to that. Yeah.
Certainly. I mean, some of the core needs that we have as people to be accepted, right? If we fear that we're not going to be accepted, then we're not going to necessarily be honest, or we'll try to be accepted by doing certain things, people pleasing, or things of that nature. Exactly. Even in our relationship with God, we can do that, right? We don't believe that we are actually loved and of value, so we try to earn it. And we try to jump through hoops, or make people jump through hoops. So that's an example. Another example would be, that idea of power, that idea of freedom of choice. When we don't believe we have that power, when we don't believe we have that choice, then we don't feel significant. We don't feel that we are living an abundant life. So then we operate in the sense, okay, I need to take control, right? I need to hoard things. I need to, as opposed to being in a position where you have abundant life. You have so much to give, so much to offer. There's a freedom that comes with that we don't necessarily we're not always aware of.
Right. I'm going to ask you this next question, but I want to bring Mike along. So talk to us about the pain people experience when they feel they have been duped.
It depends on the context, right? A lot of the times, if you've ever been conned, right? Obviously there's anger.
Yes.
Anger that somebody was deceptive or dishonest.
Right.
But then when it moves to a personal context, the pain gets even deeper. Not only are you upset with yourself for, blaming yourself for being trusting, but sometimes the expectation of having a safe relationship where you expected honesty, that is where the pain is at. There's a loss. There's a loss of trust. There's a loss of anticipation of hope, what you hoped for, what you expected. That's some serious pain.
Andrew, as I've been listening to what you guys have been talking about, I've been enjoying it. One thing that keeps going through my mind is that word controllers. And many times I will say to my wife or vice versa, oh, that person's a bit of a control freak. We hear that phrase. And it seems that many times our hidden agenda gets exposed if we're highly controlling. And do you see the connection between the two?
You know what? And especially in a relational context, control is usually as a result of fear. It's a reaction to fear.
We're back to fear again, right?
It often comes back to that. So if I'm afraid that I'm not going to get something, or if I'm afraid that there's not going to be enough, or if I'm afraid I'm not going to be accepted, then I try to take control of that. And that's what when we become aware, okay, what is it that I really want? What is it I really want from this person? What is it that I actually already have? So when we function in a place and live from a place of abundance, there is a whole lot less control, right? And again, it depends on the context, because when you're dealing with children and you're dealing with minors, it's very different than when you're dealing with an adult, someone who's on the same level of development and maturity.
So here's a question that I have that I think our viewers, maybe they're not asking it out loud, but inside we're processing it. When you are dealing with someone who has a hidden agenda, ultimately it would appear to me that it leads to a toxic relationship. And especially if you're the victim, if you've been brought along and you've been discouraged because of what's happened or what they promised, it didn't turn out, we get frustrated. It's one thing in the world of politics or in the grander scheme of what's happening nationally, but in relationships, what would you say is the way to recover? If you know you've been in that situation, how do you get out? We only have a short time, but maybe you could give us a couple steps that you would often give to people in your practice.
You know, the steps will vary depending on the kind of context you're in. If you're in a situation where there's physical abuse, sexual abuse, financial, spiritual, that's very different than if somebody was dishonest with you about, I don't know, taxes or, you know, whether or not they forgot to pick up something at the grocery. So it's very different. How do you recover? Well, I think it's important to be aware of the boundaries, right? It's so important to be aware of the boundaries because a lot of the times we stay in places that are not safe for us. So it's important to prioritize safety. I think the other thing is to really be honest with yourself, right? Be honest with yourself. What are the goals? Why am I still here? What's holding me here?
I think that's a huge issue, Andrew.
I was thinking the same thing.
Being
Absolutely.
that honesty, that honesty is so important. Why am I staying stuck? Last point, how do you get unstuck?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think after you've been honest with yourself, I think it's important to seek clarity with the other person. If you have thoughts or ideas, before you come to conclusions, it's important to get clarity with the other person, to really put it out there, to say, you know what, this is what I perceive to be going on. This is what I'm thinking, right? Can you bring clarity to this? Is this what's really happening? And then get clarity before you come to conclusions, and then you move on from there.
Those are some really good points. Thank you so much for joining us today, Coach Drew. What does God say about dealing with conflict and the harm our hidden agendas can cause? That's next in Mike's Word.
Transparency, honesty, and being the real thing. That's what we look for in people, isn't it? That's what we look for in our leaders, politicians. We want it in the people that we call family. We want it in the people that we work with. How do we become the real thing when it seems that so many people have a hidden agenda? Quite a while ago, I came across this article by Ben Patterson when he wrote in the Grand Essentials. It has stuck with me. I want to share it with you today. He says, I have a theory about old age. I believe that when life has whittled us down to the bare essentials, when joints and skin have wrinkled and capillaries have clogged and hardened, that's a picture, what is left of us is what we have been all along. He says, Exhibit A is a distant uncle. All his life, he spent his time doing nothing but finding new ways to get rich. He spent his senescence very comfortably, drooling and babbling about the money he had made. When life whittled him down to the bare essentials, all that was left in him was raw greed. And then he said, consider Exhibit B. He said, this was my wife's grandmother. When she died in her mid-80s, she already had been senile for several years. What did this lady talk about? The best example I can think of is when we asked her to pray before dinner. And I'm reading it here. It says she would reach out and hold the hands of those sitting near her. And she would look up to heaven with a broad smile across her face. Her chin would quiver as she poured out her love to Jesus. Her hand would be patting our hands. That was Edna in a nutshell. She loved Jesus. She loved people. She couldn't remember our names, but she couldn't keep her hands from patting us lovingly whenever we got near. When life whittled her down to her raw essence, all there was left was love. Love for God and love for people. Now, those are the kind of people we want to be around, isn't it? And that's why I think we get so ripped, we get so upset when we feel someone has had a hidden agenda, especially someone really close to us, and we've been duped. We've been taken in. The Apostle Paul knew what that was like, because hidden agendas, they damage us emotionally, they damage us physically, and they damage us spiritually. And we're journeying on in the book of Philippians today, and I want to read a passage to you. It's going to come up on the screen. Track with me as we see this New Testament man of faith deal with the hidden agenda of people. He talks about his own situation about being in prison. He said, I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything has happened to me here has helped to spread the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I'm in chains, that he was in prison because of Christ. And because of my imprisonment, most of the believers have gained confidence and boldly speak about God's message without fear. It's true that some are preaching out of jealousy and rivalry. There's that hidden agenda. But others preach about Christ with pure motives. When I see that passage, I think of what Ben Patterson was talking about. I see the uncle. I see those preaching out of jealousy and rivalry, the raw greed, the raw desire to put themselves ahead, and then others like Aunt Edna. Who would you rather be like? I know who I want to be like, and I know who I want to have around me. But let's think about the hidden agenda. Here the Apostle Paul was in jail. There were people who were jealous of him, and now they were using the fact that he was in prison to exploit themselves, to say, hey, look at me. And they were religious people. They professed to be followers of Jesus. We're going to see in a moment how Paul moved past that. But it had to stick a barb in his heart. It's painful. And I think hidden agendas, as we heard from Coach Drew and Julie as they were talking, they're often fueled by four things. I've discovered that a hidden agenda, even coming out of my own life, is often fueled out of fear. When I give room for fear, it makes me want to control the situation. It wants me to control people. As a parent, I wanted to control my kids, how they turned out. And then I had to realize the point came when I needed to release them. But many people are filled with fear and they don't want to lose control. We see that with evil dictatorships, and we are repelled with the thought and what we see, especially in the news these days. It comes out of fear, the fear of losing control. But sometimes there's the raw selfishness, just like Ben Patterson's uncle. That raw selfishness that just says, I know what I'm going to get for. I don't care who I knock over on the way. I'm just going to knock them down. Sometimes it's jealousy. Oh, we want what the other person has. And then sometimes it's just simply defiance to God. And maybe that's where you're at today. I can't read your mail. I don't know your story, but I know right now that God wants you and I to be men and women who live with integrity, who live honestly, who are people that people can trust. But to survive a hidden agenda, you and I need to get what I call God's perspective. Paul says something very beautiful here. He says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened. What is it that he wanted us to know? He wanted us to know that there's a bigger picture at work than we can often see. And that picture is seen over and over through examples that we find in the Bible. I think of the Joseph principle. His brothers threw him into prison. They wanted to get rid of him. They were jealous of him. They said, we're going to get rid of this guy. And later on in life, when he is the number 2 leader in the country of Egypt, and they come before him, he said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. God had given him a bigger perspective. When people are robbing you of your joy, when they come with their hidden agenda, remember that God has a bigger picture. Paul would say, we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him. And think of Jesus when he went to the cross, the agenda that was there. He didn't want to go. He didn't want to fall prey to that evil, but rather he said, Lord, not my will, but yours be done. You see, as we learn to trust God, we can discover that he will bring good out of your bad. I want to ask Julie, as we think about this whole thing of hidden agendas, what stands out in your mind today?
You know, we can't control what happens to us. We can't control other people's agendas. And I think that's a big point there when you talk about the Joseph principle, that what you meant for evil, but God meant it for good. And I've seen that in my own life, that, you know, you may think everything's falling apart, but when you follow Jesus, you can always trust that he will change it around and you'll see something beautiful birthed out of that. And I've seen that so strongly in my own life. And the other thing is, I remember when I was in a beauty pageant and I really wanted to win and I got second place. And if I had won, I may not have, I know I wouldn't be where I am today. Jesus knew better than I did. I had to trust him.
But it's hard in those moments,
It is. It's really
painful.
hard.
Yeah, and so as we conclude today, I don't know where you're at in your journey. Maybe you feel like Julie said, you've come second place. I don't want to be trite when I say this, but with God, it's not just that you're first, but if he had a refrigerator, your picture would be on it. You are loved by him. He's walking with you. He will not fail you or forsake you.
So, Mike, I want to share with you this morning, I was reading in the news from the National Post, it said most COVID-vaccinated Canadians are mistrustful of the unvaccinated and medical exemptions, saying 69% of Canadians think that when someone says they're not getting the vaccine or they have an exemption, that there's a hidden agenda, that they're lying.
Say, that sounds like a hidden agenda to me.
Right?
Yeah.
I thought that was very
So what else
interesting.
were they bringing out in this article?
The fact that people exactly that. The fact that people are saying one thing, but do they really mean that? And how do they find out the truth about that? And how they feel they can't press for information to find out the truth.
I think part of that comes out of what I shared earlier about fear.
Yes.
Because out of your fear, they're saying, I'm not sure that if you're not vaccinated that I want you around me.
Exactly.
Maybe you're carrying something. And I want to lessen my risk, lessen my chances.
Yes.
And so people are segregating and people are feeling the isolation. And many of the people who chose to be on the front lines and didn't want to be vaccinated are now saying, we're getting thrown under the bus.
Yep.
Does nobody care about us?
Yep.
So the hidden agenda thing really kind of
I know, and you see it in
surfaced in a variety
society
of ways.
too. Like we talked about with businesses. Sorry to cut you off there, but you see it. There's stats talking about how CEOs end up being the most psychopathic in their desire for their hidden agendas, and to the point that they're saying that there's around 4% of CEOs that have psychopathic tendencies, and you think about those that are in prison are around 10%, and we're like. Wow, and only 1% of the population generally are like that. And
we're kind of wondering if Big Brother, what he's doing, what he's up to in the whole conversation.
And it was interesting, I was also reading, and I want to throw this out to you. Here's interesting point. Here's how to spot within 10 minutes if someone has a hidden agenda. I'll just throw it out to you and see what you say.
Well, we've only got a minute.
Oh,
so,
yes,
okay.
yes. The conversation quickly becomes about, and stays about, them.
Yeah, always wanting to talk about themselves. And maybe you need to ponder that as well. Is that me or is that someone that you're dealing with? Because Coach Drew said we need to recognize what actually is being said and how we're being manipulated. What was the second one
All
you
right,
came up
the
with?
second one says they constantly revisit a certain subject because they're trying to bring it back to themselves. Like, how can I say, oh, you're talking about this, how can I bring it around to be about me?
And many times what happens, Julie, is when people do that, they heap guilt and shame
Ooh, that's
on
a good
us.
point.
And we can't escape from that. We can't run from it if somebody's always saying, remember when.
Oh, yes.
'Cause that's a real
good.
twist, isn't it?
It is a real twist, like right in there. Number 3, their eye contact and body language seem to be off. It just doesn't seem to gel. Like, where are they going with their eyes? Like, I don't know if that's shifty eyes or what. But
Yeah, okay, well, I just want to look you straight in the eye, folks, and say, let's listen hard about the subject today and think about how it's impacting your relationships.
Okay, so just before we go, Mike, you were at a local food bank here in Ontario and at the church that you lead. The food bank has exploded with items thanks to the many people and companies helping out during this pandemic. Set up this week's Unsung Heroes for us, Mike.
Well, it's a great story, and I'm glad that I've been able to have a small part in it.
Absolutely.
But when COVID started, we're wondering, what do we do? Maybe that was the hidden agenda of the church, saying, how do we best represent Jesus in the community? And so we said we want to feed people. But one of the realities where our church is located is that a lot of people who are without couldn't get there. It wasn't on a very fast bus route.
Oh.
And so out of that, people started to show up. They started to give. We started to help with a couple families. And then it just kind of mushroomed. And now after a year, because this was what was called a church plant, it was a brand new church, and you're saying, how are we going to support this? How are we going to provide for it? But God has been doing a miracle like he wants to do in your life. And now I'm really excited. You're going to hear as we watch the video how North End Church is caring for over 400 families.
Wow.
And maybe there's a way that you want to participate. Maybe you want to help out with that. We would love for you to participate with us. That's my hidden agenda right there.
That's awesome.
You're welcome to join us. All sorts of amazing stories have come out of COVID. Call it COVID miracle. We call it the North End Food Bank. It was a response to a nudge in a leader's heart to provide food for the many families that were struggling when COVID first hit. North End Church is a brand new church. It's a church plant. It's 3 years old. And suddenly, after 15 months, COVID hit, and we wondered how the church would even survive. But God moves through generous people, and people started to give. People started to share. What's unique about the North End Food Bank is that most people can't get to it by car because people who are in need don't have transportation. And so one of the few food banks in the Niagara region, North End Food Bank, delivers the food. And so what started with 1 or 2 families grew to 10 or 20. And now, after a year, the North End Food Bank cares for over 400 families through generous gifts, from boxes from Indigo to E.D. Smith making generous donations. The list goes on and on. The people have given incredibly. This year alone, over 62,000 pounds of food have come into this little food bank. It's like the little engine that could. Never underestimate the power of a dream. Never underestimate what God can do through you. Consider, if you do, North End Food Bank.